Welcome back. At this point in the course, we've already accomplished a lot. First, we've learned a number of rich target vocabulary words, such as factitious, mountebank, and Donnybrook. Second, we've also learned about how to learn vocabulary effectively. With our target words, we've applied the 5 core principles of effective vocabulary learning, starting with clear definitions, placing the words in rich context, making connections to the word, exploring the morphology of the word, and semantic chunking. Definition, context, connections, morphology, and semantic chunking. These 5 core principles are now powerful tools in your personal vocabulary toolkit. You own them now. And let's not forget about the vocabulary notebook itself. Don't worry if it doesn't look pretty or if it's not perfectly organized. I don't care about that. Just the very act of you physically writing down words and definitions and making connections will plant those words more solidly in your lexicon, your mental library of words. Now remember, with your vocabulary notebook, the process is just as valuable as the product. This is because the real vocabulary notebook, the one that we're after, is right up here in your mind, not in a notebook or on a computer. So, with these vocabulary tools in mind, I've got 2 questions for you. First, how can you maintain and even deepen your knowledge of the vocabulary words that you've already learned in this course so that you don't lose them once we move on to the next lecture? So you don't forget those words 3 weeks, 3 months, or even 3 years from now. And second, how can you do it in a way that's engaging and doesn't take all day? Well, today I'm going to share some more engaging, effective ways to reinforce your vocabulary knowledge. And I want you to add these strategies to your vocabulary toolkit. I've chosen strategies that, once learned, take minutes, not hours. They'll give you a lot of bang for your learning buck. So let's start with learning the basic definition of a word. Now, when you were in school, how did you learn vocabulary? Did you look up the vocabulary definitions in a dictionary like me, copy them down, and try to write the newly learned words in a sentence? How'd that work for you? Let's take a look at what happens when someone has only definition-level knowledge of a word. I'm going to give you 3 examples of actual student sentences in which a surface definition-level knowledge of a word was not quite enough. Now, these sentences are from a well-known vocabulary study done by researchers George Miller and Patricia Gildea. For each of the target words, I'm going to read the dictionary definition first. Then, I'm going to read the sentence the student wrote. Ready? A first word, correlate. Dictionary definition of correlate, to be related one to the other. Student sentence, me and my parents correlate, because without them, I wouldn't be here. Makes sense, they're related. Second word, meticulous. Dictionary definition of meticulous, very careful, too particular about small details. Student sentence, I was meticulous about falling off the cliff. I was careful. Third word, relegate. Dictionary definition of relegate, send away. Student sentence, I relegated my pen pal's letter to her house. I sent it away. Now these sentences are humorous, but I've shared them to make an important point. If you noticed, each of those sentences actually made sense if all you know about the word is the definition. So obviously there's a lot more to really knowing a word and being able to use it than just knowing the definition. So why is that? So to answer, let's explore an important vocabulary concept, the iceberg metaphor. Now, what percentage of an iceberg do you think is above the water? What percent of the iceberg can you actually see? What do you think? 60%? 50? Do I hear 40? Well, the surprising answer is around 10%. Only about 10% of an iceberg is visible above sea level. So that means the vast majority of an iceberg's mass is below sea level. And this has led to the expression, the tip of the iceberg, to describe a problem that appears to be small on the surface, but which actually underneath is much more problematic than it initially looked. So what do icebergs have to do with learning vocabulary? Well, we've discussed before how a vocabulary word consists of a label for an underlying concept. When you learn the definition for a new word, you're just skimming the surface of the word's meaning. Now, a good, clear definition is a critical first step, but it's just a starting point in learning the concept. I want you to think of a dictionary definition as the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of learning the concept. What this means is that we've got to dig and dive deeper than the definition to really know a word so well that we can use it effortlessly in speaking and in writing. So for the rest of this lecture, I'll be introducing you to a number of additional strategies that you can use to dive deeper into word meanings. And the first strategy will focus on a way to help you remember the basic dictionary definitions. The other strategies will help you get beneath the surface of those definitions. Okay, so imagine that you've just learned a new word in this course, or you've just looked up a new word in the dictionary, but you're still having trouble remembering the word's basic definition. I mean, for some reason, it just won't stick. Does that sound familiar? I mean, so what can you do? Well, this is where mnemonic strategies come into play. Now, the word mnemonic is an adjective meaning intended to assist the memory. You've probably heard of mnemonic devices, which are learning techniques that help you remember information. Now, all mnemonics are based on the same learning principle, associating something you already know or something that's easy to remember, like an acronym, a phrase, or a rhyme, with something new that you're learning. There's that new to known connection again. Some familiar mnemonics include the phrase, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally," to remember the order of operations in math, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Or do you remember that acronym Roy G. Biv to remember the sequence of colors in a rainbow? Now, our go-to mnemonic device for learning vocabulary definitions is the word-part connection strategy. Now, this approach is also commonly referred to as the keyword method. However, because I don't want to confuse this with our keywords for each root, we're going to call it the word-part connection strategy in this course. It's a simple but powerful three-step strategy. And here's how it works. First, read the target word out loud. Second, analyze that word. See if the target word or any part of the target word sort of pops out at you and reminds you of something else that you already know. And third, associate that something else with the target word's meaning. All right, let's try it out. For example, let's take the word castigate. Castigate is a verb meaning to punish, rebuke, or criticize severely. You might think of an angry teacher castigating an unruly student. Now I want you to visualize the word castigate and say it out loud with me. Castigate. Is there a word part that sort of jumps out at you? How about cast? I mean, how can we connect cast, meaning to throw or hurl something, with the meaning of criticizing severely? Well, if you're castigating someone, you're casting or throwing criticisms at them. That's a memorable image. So if you were to make this word-part connection in your vocabulary notebook, you would circle or highlight cast in castigate, and you jot down the connection. But you might like visual images, And if so, you could draw a simple stick figure of a person with the figure's arm throwing or casting, and the words rebuke and criticism in the air, as if they're being cast or thrown. Now, if you prefer words to visual images, you could simply write down the connection in your own words, as in, when you castigate someone, you are casting punishments and criticisms. Let's try this word-part connection strategy out with another word that you might not know as well. Toothsome. Now, do you know what toothsome means? What do you think? Do you think toothsome means A, toothy, as in a toothsome smile, or B, delicious or sexually attractive? Well, surprisingly to most, including me when I first learned this word, toothsome actually means B, delicious as in a toothsome plate of spaghetti, or sexually attractive as in he saw a toothsome woman walk into the room. So how can we remember toothsome means delicious or sexually attractive? Let's try the word-part connection strategy again. First, let's say the word out loud, toothsome. Second, let's find a word part that pops out at us. For toothsome, it's pretty obvious, tooth. Now, how can a tooth help trigger the meaning of delicious or sexually attractive? Well, the delicious part's pretty easy. When we eat a delicious meal, what are we eating or chewing with? Our teeth. So when you see toothsome, visualize a mouthful of teeth eating a delicious meal. Maybe draw a picture of a mouth with teeth and jot down that toothsome equals teeth chewing a delicious meal. But how can we connect tooth to the second meaning of toothsome, sexually attractive or handsome? Well, what do models and good-looking folks like celebrities always do on TV? They smile a lot. And when they give us those big toothy grins, what do we see? Those perfectly straight, perfectly white teeth that have probably been artificially whitened, right? I mean, nobody's born with teeth that perfect. So you can highlight the tooth in toothsome and write tooth equals perfect toothy smiles of sexually attractive people. Okay, so let's put it all together in one image. I want you to picture a really good-looking, attractive person eating a delicious meal with their teeth taking center stage. And this will help you trigger the meaning of toothsome, which means equals delicious or sexually attractive. So just write this connection down in words, or if you want, sketch a picture, whichever works best for you. But not so fast. We actually did much more than just make a word-part connection with toothsome. Now, when I was researching this word, I took a few seconds and I plugged toothsome into the wonderful resource that I use a lot, the Online Etymology Dictionary. And guess what I found out? Guess what the etymology of toothsome is? We were actually on the right track with the connection that we just made. Because you see, toothsome came into the English language in the, get this, 1550s from a combination of the word tooth and the suffix some. In toothsome, tooth was used in a figurative sense of appetite, liking, like a sweet tooth. Well, that makes sense, right? And some is a suffix meaning tending to, causing. So something that's toothsome causes appetite or liking. It's tasty and appetizing, like a delicious meal. And by extension, a person who looks good could be considered delicious looking, couldn't they? Toothsome. And what just happened right there is what you'll find when you use this word-part connection strategy. When using word parts as a mnemonic device, there's a good chance you'll actually be digging down into the etymology of the word without even knowing it. So this toothsome example brings me back to the last point I want to make about mnemonic devices here. I believe the best mnemonic device for learning vocabulary is the one that English already has built into its linguistic DNA, the etymology and morphology, the history and structure of the words themselves. So whenever you learn a new word, remember to take a few moments and read beyond the definitions in the dictionary. Look at the etymological information that tells you the history and derivation of the word, including the roots and affixes from which the word's derived. For most words, this helps a lot. Okay, let's quickly review what we've learned so far. When learning the definition of a new word, particularly one of those words that just won't stick, use these two strategies in this order. First, see if the etymology and morphology of the word, including affixes and roots, helps you remember the definition. Like knowing that mal means bad or evil helps you remember that a malefactor is someone who does bad, evil things. Second, if the etymology or morphology doesn't help, use the word-part connection strategy and develop your own mnemonic. Connect a part of the word that jumps out at you to something that helps you remember the word's definition. And remember, connecting to visual images can be particularly powerful. Okay, that's helpful for learning the definitions. But definitions alone don't lead to deep vocabulary knowledge. So after we've learned the definition, how can we go deeper so that we actually start using the words in speaking and writing? Well, one way to move beyond the dictionary definition is to use graphic organizers. Now, a graphic organizer is a tool you can use to visually map information about a concept. And our go-to graphic organizer for vocabulary words will be a variation of the four-square concept map, as described by literacy experts Stephen A. Stahl and William E. Nagy. I'm going to take you through the process of using and creating a four-square concept map with the target word captious. So if you can, in your vocabulary notebook, I want you to draw the four-square concept map along with me as I describe it. If not, just visualize it and try to draw it afterwards. Okay? So first, I want you to visualize a square. Now I want you to divide that square into four parts or quadrants. On the top of the square, write the target word captious. C-A-P-T-I-O-U-S. Captious. In the top left quadrant, you write the definition and part of speech. Now, captious people are those annoying, nagging people who are constantly nitpicking at you and making a big deal over trivial defects and small issues. You know the type. It's the resident malcontent in your office. He is definitely a captious person. So in the top left quadrant of your four-square concept map, you might write the following dictionary definition. Captious is an adjective that means fault-finding, hypercritical, difficult to please. Okay, now imagine moving from the top left quadrant where we wrote the definition over to the top right quadrant. In the top right quadrant of a four-square concept map, you write synonyms and related words. And this is the perfect time to use a thesaurus. So for our example of captious, you might write some synonyms for captious that you already know quite well, such as finicky, hypercritical, crabby, cross, and testy. It's good to include synonyms that you already know, as these known words will serve to anchor your knowledge of the new word you're learning. Captious is related to crabby, cross, and testy. There's that new to known connection at work again. Now you might also want to include some synonyms for the target word that you know a little, but you might want to use more. For captious, these might include carping, acrimonious, and cantankerous. All rich descriptive words that I don't use enough. How about you? And when you make an effort to use such words, you're moving them from your receptive to your expressive vocabulary. And just remember, improving your vocabulary isn't just about learning new words. It's also about dusting off those old ones you know, but don't use enough. Okay, so far in our four-square map, we've got the definition in the top left quadrant and rich synonyms in the top right quadrant. Let's now move to the bottom left quadrant of our four-square. In the bottom left corner, write down examples of the word. And this is where you make those personal connections. So what's a good example of a captious person in your own life? Who do you know who is fault-finding and nitpicking? Maybe a hypercritical aunt or uncle? A busybody at work? Maybe it's an English professor who loves to bleed red marker all over your essays. So write this person's name down as an example of captious. Finally, let's move to the bottom right quadrant of our Foursquare concept map, where we write down non-examples of the word. Why non-examples? Well, remember, to know what a concept is, it's often very helpful to know what it is not. So what's the opposite of a captious, fault-finding person? How about someone who's complimentary, encouraging, even flattering? I'd write my mom here. My mom is the most complimentary, encouraging person I know. She's my non-example of captious. You could also include the antonyms complimentary and encouraging in this quadrant. So once you get the hang of Foursquare concept maps, you can fill them out pretty quickly. They take a little bit of time, so don't feel that you have to use them with every single target word that we explore. Maybe choose 1 or 2 target words that grab you and try them out. I love Foursquares because they incorporate so many of the principles of vocabulary learning into a handy visual framework. And what if you want to add more information to your Foursquare? Feel free to change it up. I am not a Procrustean teacher. Make it work for you. Make it a 5 or a 6 square. For me, I almost always add 2 more boxes. One for a picture of the word, and one for morphology that includes the affixes and roots in a word. For example, let's say you're learning the word circumlocution. Now, circumlocution is a noun referring to evasive, long-winded rambling, indirect speaking. So how can we remember circumlocution? What word parts in circumlocution pop out at you? Well, circum means around, as in circle, and the LOC root means speak, as in elocution. So circumlocution literally means to speak around, in sort of a roundabout, indirect way. You could record circum and LOC in the morphology box, and actually write the word circumlocution in a circle in the picture box. That's a great visual. So if you remember circumlocution this way, you won't forget it. So, we've learned the word part connection strategy and the Foursquare concept map. But what about those good old-fashioned standby flashcards? If you like flashcards, here's a few ways you can use them. First, you can go the traditional route, simply writing the word on one side of the index card and a definition on the other side. And you can review by looking at the word, reading it out loud, and seeing if you can articulate the definition in your own words. Then, check yourself by turning the card over. Or reverse it. Start with the definition side of the cards up and see if you can identify the target word from the definition. However, in my teaching career, I've found that flashcards are a lot more effective if you include a lot more information on the back than just the definition. For example, many of my own students write a Foursquare concept map on the back of the index cards. This way you got the word's definition, its synonyms and antonyms, and examples and non-examples of the word. And when reviewing each word, see if you can recite all of the information on the back of the card before checking yourself. That is one great way to dig deeper than just the definition. A lot of my students also draw memorable pictures or visuals on the back of their cards as memory aids. Or if it's a tricky word to pronounce, spell the word phonetically to help you remember how to say it. Now, how else can you use flashcards besides the traditional routine? Well, you can play a variation on one of my favorite games, Connect 2. Connect 2 is a vocabulary activity developed by vocabulary researcher Camille Blackowitz. This is a great game that forces you to think deeply and flexibly about vocabulary words. Simply pick 2 cards out of the deck, or if you don't like flashcards, pick 2 words from your notebook and see if you can connect them in a sentence. For example, let's say you picked mountebank and imbroglio. If you remember, a mountebank is a flamboyant charlatan, a swindler who arrives in the town marketplace, mounts a bench, and tries to sell quack medicines and cures to an unsuspecting crowd. An imbroglio is a complicated, confused situation or bitter misunderstanding. So, you might connect mountebank and imbroglio in a sentence kind of like this. The mountebank swindled half the town out of their hard-earned savings, creating quite an imbroglio in the community that lasted weeks. Isn't that great? And it's such a simple idea. Connect to encourages you to apply your word knowledge in speaking or writing while making deep connections among words. And if you're feeling a little bit cocky and want to challenge yourself, make it Connect 3 or Connect 4. Now, if you don't like flashcards or don't feel you have the time to make them, don't worry. You can use the 2-column note system we discussed in an earlier lecture. Target words in the left column, definitions, personal connections, pictures, morphology, or Foursquare concept maps in the right column. To review vocabulary with the 2-column system, simply cover up the right column with a piece of paper so that you only see the target words in the left column. Then, you can review the target words in the same way as the flashcards, including the Connect 2 activity. If you set up your vocabulary notebook this way, it does double duty as flashcard review. And finally, remember, words live in context, not on vocabulary lists or books. So if you need to actually use the words in context, you need to use them or you'll lose them. Here are 2 application activities that get you to actually use our target words. One activity is for writing, and the other's for speaking. So first, simply write the word in a sentence in your vocabulary notebook. If you write the word in a sentence, make it a sentence with enough rich context so that when you go back to read that sentence a week from now, it actually helps you remember the word. Now here's a big tip for this activity. Use example sentences from dictionaries as models. A lot of online dictionaries contain many wonderful usage examples. For the word captious that we learned today, you might write a sentence like this. His captious boss never complimented anyone. Instead, he tried to motivate his employees with hypercritical comments that highlighted every little mistake, fault, and error. Now notice what I've done in this sentence. I've couched the target word, captious, in a lot of rich context. I used the stereotype of the overcritical boss. I included the synonym hypercritical, and I included the related words mistake, fault, and error. Boss, hypercritical, mistake, fault, error. All words related to captious that will lead me back to its meaning. And for our speaking activity, I've got a challenge for you. Flanagan's Use It or Lose It 1 word a day challenge. Every day, try to use one of our target words in a conversation. Now, it's helpful to prep for this. If it's a completely new word for you, I like to try the word out first in a low-pressure situation, like a family dinner or with some friends. After I pick the word, I try and plan how I might casually slide it into a conversation. For example, I might mention to my family at dinner, "Man, my captious new editor didn't have one positive comment about my chapter. He bled red ink everywhere." Yes, it might be a bit contrived. Yes, it might feel a bit weird. Yes, you might get some eye rolling from your friends. But I guarantee that you will remember that word, and you'll be more likely to use it again when you really need it. So let's finish today with an important principle I learned from Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest here. Raise your hand if you've ever crammed for a test in your life. Have you ever waited until the day before a major exam, pulled an all-nighter, sucked down Cokes and munched pizza while trying to cram a semester's worth of information into your brain, and then shuffled to the exam the next morning all bleary-eyed? Do you remember frantically trying to regurgitate everything that you learned into one of those exam blue books that college professors seem to love so much, and then promptly forgetting it all by the next day? You may have passed the exam, but did you learn? How much of that information do you remember today? Now I want to ask you another question. Imagine that you're a farmer. Could you cram on the farm like we all crammed for our exams? I mean, could you sit on your rear end and do nothing all spring and summer? Wait until the day before the fall harvest and then quickly plant seeds, water them, and hope for a ton of sunlight, and then harvest the crop the next day? Cramming on the farm. It's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? If real farmers crammed like this, they'd never survive. So following Stephen Covey's lead, the point I want to make is this: real, long-term learning that makes a difference, like farming, is a natural process that takes time. And you can't trick your way through a natural process. Cramming doesn't work. However, what does work with learning is doing a little bit every day. As my yoga teacher said to our class once, don't do a 3-hour session of yoga once per week. It's better to do 20 minutes a day, every day. So, don't do a lot a little. Do a little a lot. That's the law of the farm. So I don't want you to feel that you have to do all of the activities that I shared today. I don't want you to feel that after this lecture you have to stay up late creating flashcards or making a 4-square concept map for every word. But if you want to continue to deepen your knowledge of these words during the course, or after the course is over, do this. Simply pick one target vocabulary word that's gotten into your bones, one that's grabbed you for some reason. Then pick one of the activities that I shared today and dig a little deeper into that word using the activity. Just a few minutes a day